So, Martin, what's the title of your PhD and what is it about?
The title of my PhD is Sounding Place and Placing Sound, Acoustic Communities in Manchester and Düsseldorf, circa 1870-1910. It's about how people create community through the sounds that they heard and the sounds that they made in people's everyday life. So the thesis is really about sort of picking a couple of acoustic signals, so specific sounds that have sort of social and cultural meaning. You've got a lot of sounds outside in the streets, and there's a lot of new sounds as well that are coming along and that are being introduced mainly through new technologies in the late 19th century. I write about street music, street hawkers, hawking their oranges, so they're shouting, oranges for sale, or they're selling needles or any kind of odd thing. And these people strategically positioned themselves on the streets. So they often said on street corners so that, their sound would spread, in both ways and would resonate off the buildings so that they would get the most spread. It's also about all these technologies. So it's about cars. And it's also about road surfaces, which sounds incredibly boring. But in the late 19th century, there was lots of experiments with new road surfaces because, of course, there was all these little granite sets, and they made lots of noise if carts and hooves, if horses' hooves would go over them. And then they were experimenting with wooden pavement, and that was noiseless because it was smooth. But then there were issues with it as well because it was raining a lot in Manchester, for example. And then the horses would trip and break their legs, or people would trip and break their legs, etc.
Okay. How are you going about researching for your PhD? Where have you found the sort of information that you're interested in? I know that you've travelled abroad, for example.
Exactly, yeah. So my research is, as my title sort of suggested, is comparative. Okay, so I write about Britain and I write about Germany. I've picked these two sort of heavy industrial sites of the late 19th century that were also big urban conglomerations, basically. So I got to travel to Germany and did a German language course in Berlin, and then I went to Düsseldorf and Bochum and Essen and all these sort of cities in that sort of area of the Ruhrgebiet, and went to archives, read a lot of different types of sources, from council records to personal testimony, newspapers, and also I used two sound archives. There's the Northwest Sound Archive, which is just north of Manchester, and there's a guy in Germany who has his personal archive, which he created in the 1980s.
What is your sort of main contribution to the current debate? Why is your PhD relevant?
So I engage with quite a lot of historiography around sort of governmentality, which is a concept that tells people that they were becoming liberal subjects in the late 19th century, okay, and that people were sort of starting to control themselves, and that the state didn't really have to do this anymore. However, those histories are written top down.
Yes.
And I say that actually there were sort of these regimes were also in place from the bottom up, okay? So the working classes, the lower classes had their own sort of regimes of order and regimes of noise, and I write about those.